Picture this. You step into a royal court centuries ago, where every thread you wear could mean the difference between favor and ruin. The color of your cloak, the cut of your sleeve, even the embroidery hidden in the folds of your gown. These weren't just choices. They were declarations, weapons, lifelines. In the halls of power, fashion was never just about beauty. It was a language of control, a silent war fought in silk and gold. Kings and queens didn't just dress to impress, they dressed to conquer. Take a moment to think about the clothes in your own closet. They tell a story, don't they? Maybe they reflect your personality, your mood, even your aspirations. Now imagine that same idea, but with stakes so high, a single misstep could cost you your head. That's the world we're about to enter. From the ruthless sumptuary laws that dictated who could wear what, to the secret symbols stitched into royal garments as coded messages, fashion was a chessboard. And the players, they weren't just stylish, they were strategic geniuses. This is the untold story of how fabric shaped empires, how a forbidden dye could spark a rebellion, or how a queen's choice of headdress might topple a dynasty. We'll unravel the hidden politics behind those lavish portraits, where every ribbon and jewel was a move in a deadly game. Why did Elizabeth I surround herself in towering ruffs and blinding white makeup? How did a single pair of gloves become a symbol of defiance in the French court? The answers lie in the threads of history, woven with intrigue, power, and sometimes blood. So adjust your crown or your metaphorical hat, because we're about to reveal how the most opulent outfits in history were actually the sharpest weapons of all. The story of fashion as power begins in the sun-baked courts of ancient Egypt, where a pharaoh's linen wasn't just clothing, it was a glowing declaration of divinity. The finer the weave, the closer to the gods. Commoners caught wearing those translucent fabrics risked brutal punishment, because in a world where the ruler was seen as a living deity, even cloth could blur sacred lines. Half a world away, the Chinese emperors took this idea even further. Their robes bore dragons with 5 claws, a design so fiercely guarded that anyone else daring to stitch even 4 claws faced execution. These weren't just dress codes, they were the original power plays, carving society into tiers with thread and dye. But how did something as personal as clothing become such a potent political tool? The shift happened when rulers realized fashion could do more than separate classes, it could manipulate them. Medieval Europe turned fabric into a battlefield. Kings draped rivals in gifts of extravagant silks, not out of generosity, but to bankrupt them through sheer upkeep. Queens like Elena of Aquitaine used their gowns as diplomatic weapons, wearing colors from enemy territories to signal alliances or provoke wars. And then came the sumptuary laws, rules so detailed they dictated everything from the width of a merchant's shoe buckle to the number of pearls a countess could wear. Break these laws and you weren't just fined, you were humiliated, stripped of status, sometimes even banished. The genius of these systems, they made oppression visible. Every glance at a neighbor's sleeve reminded you of your place. But here's the twist. The very people these laws sought to control began flipping the script. Ambitious merchants stitched hidden gold threads into their hems. Noblewomen commissioned accidentally oversized veils, and artists painted forbidden fabrics into portraits as quiet acts of rebellion. Fashion, meant to chain people to their rank, became the picklock to break free. Sumptuary laws turned fabric into a social minefield, where wearing the wrong shade or texture could upend your life. In 14th century England, the vibrant purple reserved for royalty wasn't just a preference, once it was a monopoly enforced by violence. The dye came from rare Mediterranean mollusks, with thousands crushed to produce a single ounce of pigment. Wearing it without royal blood was more than audacity, it was treason. Meanwhile, in Renaissance Venice, a merchant's wife caught draping herself in imported Flemish lace could face fines exceeding her husband's yearly earnings, or worse, public shaming in the stocks. These laws weren't arbitrary whims. They were carefully crafted tools to keep the elite unchallenged. But here's where it gets fascinating. The very people these laws targeted found ingenious ways to undermine them. Wealthy commoners in Florence commissioned accidentally oversized sleeves lined with forbidden silk, easily hidden under cloaks during inspections. In Elizabethan England, ambitious gentry dyed wool with lichen and berry extracts to mimic the royals' exclusive hues, creating peasant purples that infuriated the crown. Even embroidery became a sneaky act of defiance, subtle patterns resembling forbidden heraldry stitched into household linens, wearable insults hidden in plain sight. The real irony, sumptuary laws backfired spectacularly. By making luxury goods illegal for the lower classes, rulers inadvertently turned them into irresistible status symbols. Black markets flourished, with smugglers risking execution to transport contraband velvet and pearls, and when authorities cracked down, the backlash was fierce. In 17th century Spain, the collapse of sumptuary enforcement sparked a fashion free-for-all, with formerly banned fabrics flooding the streets. Suddenly, a dress could lie about your rank as easily as a forged document. This was the paradox at the heart of fashion politics. The tighter rulers gripped control over clothing, the more it slipped through their fingers. What began as a tool to freeze social hierarchy ended up proving something revolutionary. That identity could be stitched, dyed, and draped, not just inherited. And that realization would eventually unravel the very systems these laws were meant to protect. Marie Antoinette's muslin dresses weren't just scandalous, they were revolutionary. At a time when French royalty draped themselves in brocade stiff with jewels, the Queen's choice of simple, airy peasant fabric sent shockwaves through Versailles. It wasn't mere whimsy. By dressing like a shepherdess while still wearing her towering pouf hairstyles, she exposed the absurdity of aristocratic excess and, in doing so, handed the public a visual weapon to wield against the crown. The same gowns that made her seem relatable to the masses also infuriated the nobles, who saw their entire system of privilege being mocked with every stitch. Across the Channel in Tudor England, merchants played a similar game with far higher stakes. When the wealthy middle class began sporting Spanish silks and Venetian velvets, fabrics legally reserved for nobility, they weren't just breaking sumptuary laws. They were staging a quiet coup. A single smuggled bolt of crimson damask became a middle finger to the feudal order, proof that money could now buy the trappings of power traditionally reserved for bloodlines. Authorities raided warehouses and burned contraband fabrics in public squares, but the message was already woven into society. Class barriers could be unraveled, one forbidden garment at a time. Yet defiance wasn't the only way fashion shifted power. Royals quickly learned that clothing could be just as effective for manipulation as it was for rebellion. Take Elizabeth I's infamous rainbow portrait, where her gown is embroidered with eyes and ears, a not-so-subtle reminder that her surveillance network was everywhere. Or Louis XIV's daily ritual of lever, where nobles competed to hand him his shirt, turning a mundane act into a theater of loyalty. These rulers didn't just wear clothes, they staged performances, using every ribbon and button to choreograph perception. The brilliance of these tactics lay in their duality. A queen's extravagant gown could simultaneously awe her subjects and bankrupt rival nobles forced to keep up. A king's signature hat might spark a trend so expensive it drained his enemies' coffers. Fashion became a hall of mirrors where every choice reflected or distorted the balance of power. And as we'll see next, this psychological warfare reached its peak in the courts where perception wasn't just strategy, it was survival. Elizabeth I didn't just wear her iconic ruffs, she weaponized them. Each starched snow-white fold was a calculated statement, broadcasting her untouched purity and divine right to rule, but her genius went beyond personal branding. When foreign ambassadors arrived at her court, they weren't just greeted by a queen, they were bombarded by a walking masterpiece of propaganda. The jewels sewn into her gowns spelled out Latin mottos praising her wisdom. Her sleeves were embroidered with tiny ships, a not-so-subtle nod to England's naval dominance. Even the metallic thread in her fabrics caught candlelight just so, making her appear to glow during audiences. This wasn't vanity, it was psychological warfare, a way to dazzle and intimidate before a single word was spoken. Louis XIV took this theater to dizzying heights. His Versailles court wasn't just a palace, it was a stage, and every courtier a costumed player in his grand production. The Sun King's daily dressing ritual, the lever, was a public spectacle where nobles fought for the honor of handing him his stockings. Why? Because in this world, proximity to the king's wardrobe meant proximity to power. Louis didn't just wear extravagant fabrics, he turned them into a loyalty test. The brocades and laces he gifted to favorites came with crushing expenses. Maintaining these outfits could bankrupt lesser nobles, ensuring their dependence on his favor. But the real masterstroke was how these rulers extended their fashion propaganda beyond their own courts. When Elizabeth sent portraits to foreign rulers, she didn't just dispatch paintings, she mailed carefully crafted illusions. The famous Armada portrait, created after England's defeat of the Spanish fleet, showed her hand resting on a globe, fingers covering the Americas. A coincidence? Hardly. Every detail, from the stormy seas behind her to the pearls in her hair symbolizing chastity and imperial ambition, was a coded message to rival monarchs. England was untouchable. Meanwhile, Louis exported his influence through fabric itself, by mandating that French courtiers wear only domestically produced silks. He turned fashion into economic warfare. Lyon's looms boomed, flooding Europe with French textiles and bankrupting Italian competitors. Soon, wearing French silk became shorthand for sophistication, a cultural conquest as potent as any military campaign. This was fashion as diplomacy, where a single dress could broker alliances or provoke wars. When Catherine de Medici wanted to intimidate her son's rebellious nobles, she hosted a banquet where her ladies-in-waiting appeared identically dressed in her signature black, a chilling display of unity. Decades later, Peter the Great of Russia would force his court to abandon traditional robes for Western coats, using tailoring as a crowbar to pry open his empire to European influence. The lesson was clear: in the hands of rulers, clothing wasn't just fabric. It was a currency of influence, a silent ambassador that could cross borders without passports. And as we'll see, this sartorial statecraft reached its zenith in the most unexpected places, where a single glove or hat could rewrite the fate of nations. Catherine de Medici understood the lethal potential of a well-placed wardrobe better than anyone. When her 14-year-old daughter Elizabeth left France to marry Spain's Philip II, the trousseau wasn't just lavish, it was a tactical arsenal. Gowns woven with real gold thread, sleeves so heavy with pearls they required hidden supports, headdresses designed to make the petite queen appear towering. Each piece screamed French superiority, forcing the Spanish court into a humiliating realization. Their new queen's dowry alone could fund an army, but Catherine's masterstroke came in the linings. Hidden beneath the opulence were layers of perfumed leather, a calculated defense against poison, rumored to seep through fabric. Every stitch in that wardrobe served dual purposes: dazzle or defend, seduce or survive. Yet fashion's role in diplomacy wasn't always about intimidation. Just decades earlier, the Treaty of Cambrai, known as the Ladies' Peace, was brokered by two queens who used their wardrobes as white flags. Margaret of Austria and Louise of Savoy deliberately wore matching shades of soft grey during negotiations, a visual truce that softened hardened diplomats. Their subdued silks whispered what words couldn't: mutual exhaustion from war. The lesson: where swords and treaties failed, a shared color palette could disarm. But the darkest twists came when fashion wasn't just a tool, but a trap. In 1587, Scottish nobles received gifts of embroidered gloves from their English allies. The lavish presents, soaked in arsenic, killed wearers within hours. Poisoned garments became such a feared tactic that Russian Tsars employed dedicated tasters to wear new clothes before they touched royal skin. Even Henry VIII's sixth wife, Catherine Parr, narrowly escaped death when a loyal servant tried on her coronation gown first and collapsed. The deadliest trickery often hid in plain sight. During Italy's Pazzi conspiracy, assassins identified Medici allies by their telltale striped sleeves, slaughtering them mid-banquet. In Mughal India, courtiers knew to refuse any robe tied with a left-hand knot, a silent death warrant from the emperor. What made these schemes so effective was their cruel elegance. A doomed victim might spend their final moments admiring the very fabric that betrayed them. This was fashion's razor edge. It could build bridges or spring snares, often in the same stitch. As we'll see next, even accessories held this lethal duality where a single misplaced glove could topple a throne. Anne Boleyn's French hood did more than frame her face, it framed her fate. That sleek black headdress, imported from France, became a lightning rod for scandal, with enemies whispering it concealed witches' marks. But the real danger wasn't superstition, it was science. Historians now suspect the vibrant green dye in her favorite gowns contained arsenic, a slow poison that may explain her multiple miscarriages and deteriorating health before her execution. This wasn't just slander, it was sabotage woven into the very fabric of her wardrobe. The Byzantine Empire took this sinister craft to chilling extremes. Empresses like Theodora allegedly gifted rivals with exquisitely embroidered birthing gowns, their silks soaked in abortifacient herbs. One account describes a noblewoman collapsing mid-banquet, her sumptuous purple stoles secretly treated with a contact toxin. What made these attacks so effective was their deniability after all. Who would suspect the embroidery itself? Yet for every tale of poisoned velvets, there were equally ingenious uses of fashion to preserve power. Take the Mughal emperor's legendary Farsh-i Shandan, a sandalwood-infused carpet laid beneath the throne. As courtiers prostrated themselves, the scent clung to their clothes, a sensory reminder of imperial favor they carried for days. In Japan, shoguns distributed specially dyed indigo robes to allies, the color's near imperceptible fading signaling when loyalty needed renewing. Perhaps the most brilliant defensive fashion came from Renaissance Venice. Doges wore multi-layered robes with secret compartments, one holding fragrant herbs to ward off plague, another concealing a dagger for sudden threats. Their distinctive corno hats weren't just ceremonial. The spiraled shape made poisoning drinks at state banquets nearly impossible. This was armor disguised as attire, proving that in royal courts, survival often depended on the stitches unseen. The duality of fashion as both weapon and shield reached its peak with Catherine the Great's smallpox dresses. After surviving the disease, she hosted inoculation parties where guests wore garments deliberately contaminated with healed patients' scabs, a macabre but effective early vaccine distributed through lace and ribbon. Meanwhile, her enemy Gustav III of Sweden took the opposite approach, commissioning a silver-threaded quarantine suit that made him look like a walking chandelier, but kept plague at bay during epidemics. These weren't just clothes, they were life-saving technologies wrapped in elegance. A queen's embroidered glove might neutralize poison, while a king's perfumed wig could mask the scent of impending betrayal. In a world where touch could kill and breath could betray, fashion became the ultimate survival tool, blending beauty with brutal practicality. Philip II of Spain turned his court into a sea of black, not for mourning, but for control. Every noble, every ambassador, even visiting princes were required to dress in unrelenting darkness, a visual echo of the king's own severe piety. This wasn't just a preference, it was a masterclass in psychological dominance. By stripping away color, Philip eliminated distractions, forcing his courtiers to focus solely on his words. But beneath the somber surface, the game was anything but simple. The richest nobles competed through texture, their matte velvets giving way to scandalously expensive, luster blacks that shimmered like raven feathers under candlelight. A subtle rebellion, proving even in uniformity, hierarchy found a way to whisper. Meanwhile, Versailles was a mirror opposite, a riot of pastels and gold where Louis XIV's dress code read like a battlefield map. The rules were dizzying, only certain shades of blue for Mondays, silver embroidery reserved for dukes, heel heights precisely measured to ensure the king always towered tallest. But here's the twist, these weren't just displays of power, they were financial traps. A single courtier's outfit could cost the equivalent of a village yearly harvest, forcing nobles to bankrupt themselves for the privilege of proximity. Louis didn't just want obedience, he wanted dependence, weaving his aristocracy into a gilded cage of silk and debt. When these fashion empires collided, the results were explosive. Take the infamous glove incident of 1623, when the Spanish ambassador arrived at Versailles wearing black leather gloves, a direct insult to Louis' decree that only pastel kid leather be worn indoors. The king responded by having his own guards stripped to their shirt sleeves mid-ceremony, a calculated humiliation that nearly sparked a war. Similarly, when English diplomats wore their signature dark wool to the pastel-drenched Russian court of Empress Anna, she had them doused in pink powder before audiences, turning their solemnity into a joke. The real cultural clashes, though, happened in the colonies. Spanish conquistadors forced indigenous leaders to wear heavy European wool in tropical climates, not just as submission but as slow torture. In India, British colonists banned local rulers from wearing Mughal-style turban jewels, only to later steal the designs for Queen Victoria's crown. These weren't just fashion disagreements, they were acts of erasure, using fabric to overwrite identities. Yet resistance flourished in the details. Ottoman diplomats meeting European monarchs wore robes lined with forbidden Islamic calligraphy, hidden messages brushing against imperial enemies with every bow. Japanese shoguns hosting Dutch traders donned kimono sleeves cut slightly too long, a silent assertion that foreign guests remained beneath their notice. Even Marie Antoinette, that supposed fashion rebel, knew the power of hybridity. Her infamous Gaul dresses blended French silk with Indian muslin, a sartorial middle finger to mercantilist laws. This was fashion as cultural artillery, where every folded hem or missing button could declare war or surrender. And as global empires expanded, the battlefield only grew more intricate, with silk routes becoming spy routes and embroidery serving as encrypted maps. The next time you stand before a closet, ask yourself, If your clothes had to negotiate peace treaties or smuggle revolutions, what would they say? The moment a Venetian merchant unrolled his first bolt of Ottoman silk in 16th century Europe, the fabric ignited more than desire. It lit the fuse of economic warfare. These weren't just textiles, they were Trojan horses smuggling foreign influence into the heart of kingdoms. European weavers took one look at the intricate patterns, impossible to replicate with their clunky looms, and saw their livelihoods unraveling. Cities like Lyon and Florence responded with draconian laws, banning imported silks while offering bounties to anyone who could steal Ottoman weaving techniques. The stakes, nothing less than control over the luxury trade that funded empires. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Ottoman sultans watched European ambassadors sweat through their woolen layers with barely concealed amusement. To the silk-clad court in Istanbul, these overdressed visitors were walking advertisements of backwardness. But the joke had a sharp edge. When Sultan Suleiman received Habsburg envoys, he made sure they stood for hours in their suffocating velvets while his advisors lounged on cushions in airy linens, a not-so-subtle demonstration of who held the upper hand. The message was clear: your fabrics are as clumsy as your diplomacy. Yet the real battles raged in the markets. In 17th century England, a single smuggled Indian calico could fetch 10 times its weight in silver, sparking riots among Spitalfield's weavers who burned contraband fabrics in the streets. France took it further, executing merchants caught selling foreign textiles, but prohibition backfired spectacularly. The more authorities cracked down, the more desirable these forbidden fabrics became. Soon, enterprising smugglers were stitching Asian silks into petticoat linings or unraveling them to mix with local threads, creating hybrids that loopholed their way past inspectors. The irony: these trade wars birthed some of history's most ingenious fakes. Dutch printers developed chine a la branch, a technique to counterfeit Ottoman patterns so convincingly that even experts were fooled. Italian dyers concocted Venetian scarlet, a cheap imitation of coveted Turkish red. And when Mughal embroiderers began adding European motifs to their exports, they accidentally created the first globally fusioned fashion centuries before the term existed. But the most unexpected twist came when fashion crossed from economic weapon to diplomatic bridge. After years of embargoes, the French court received an unlikely peace offering from Persia, a set of carpets so finely woven they could fold into a walnut shell. Louis XIV, realizing the craftsmanship surpassed anything his own factories could produce, quietly lifted restrictions on Eastern textiles. It was a rare moment when beauty trumped protectionism and proved that even in the cutthroat world of fashion politics, true artistry could sometimes weave its way past borders. This dance of imitation and prohibition reshaped more than just wardrobes. It redrew the map of global influence. The same silks that sparked trade wars also financed navies. The same dyes that caused riots later funded revolutions. And as these luxurious fabrics trickled down from palaces to market stalls, they carried with them something revolutionary: the idea that identity wasn't fixed but could be tried on and transformed one stolen stitch at a time. Queen Victoria's mourning wardrobe didn't just reflect grief, it reshaped an empire's economy. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, her relentless black attire sparked a nationwide demand for jet jewelry, mourning crepe, and dark dyes so intense they polluted rivers. Factories pivoted overnight, textile towns boomed, and entire industries bent to the whim of one woman's sartorial sorrow. But this wasn't just about supply and demand, it was psychological control. By turning grief into a public dress code, Victoria normalized a culture of restraint, her somber palette dripping down to middle-class households eager to mimic royal solemnity. Even children's dolls were stripped of colors, dressed in miniature mourning garb as if sadness itself could be sewn into the fabric of society. Across the Channel, Louis XIV's ribbon obsession proved equally transformative. When Versailles declared ribbons the ultimate status symbol, peasants who couldn't afford silk scraps tied straw around their wrists in pathetic imitation. The black market for contraband ribbons grew so vast that authorities posted spies in millinery shops, while smugglers stitched illicit satin into horse blankets and baby swaddles. But the real power lay in the absurdity. By convincing an entire nation to fixate on something as frivolous as ribbon length, the crown diverted attention from bread shortages and tax hikes. Fashion became the ultimate sleight of hand, a glittering distraction from unrest. Fast forward to today, and the playbook remains eerily familiar. When a celebrity's Instagram post sends fast fashion brands scrambling to replicate their outfit within hours, or when political figures adopt signature colors to manipulate public perception, they're wielding the same tactics, just with algorithms instead of royal decrees. Consider how modern leaders carefully cultivate their public image through deliberate wardrobe choices. A rolled-up sleeve to signal hard work, a boldly colored tie for authority, or even the absence of a tie to appear relatable. These aren't accidents, they're calculated moves straight from the royal court's playbook. The most insidious modern parallel, how trends now cascade through social media with programmed precision. Medieval sumptuary laws enforced class divisions through fabric restrictions. Today, influencer partnerships and exclusive brand drops create artificial scarcity, gatekeeping style behind paywalls and waitlists. The 18th century black market for French lace has its counterpart in password-protected online drops and bots that snatch up limited editions before real fans can click purchase. Even the concept of dupes, cheap imitations of designer items, echoes Renaissance merchants sneaking in knockoff velvets stamped with counterfeit noble seals. Perhaps the starkest evolution is in surveillance. Where Tudor spies once reported nobles wearing forbidden silks, today's data trackers monitor purchasing habits to predict and manipulate the next big trend. Algorithms now serve the role of royal wardrobe masters, deciding what masses should crave next based on what elites secretly favor. The difference: instead of losing their heads for breaking dress codes, modern rebels face algorithmic shadow banning or social media exile for bucking trends. Yet resistance persists. Just as Enlightenment thinkers published pamphlets mocking sumptuary laws, today's DIY fashionistas upcycle thrifted clothes into statement pieces that defy fast fashion cycles. The punk safety pins of the 1970s and the slogan tees of contemporary activists prove that clothing remains a potent medium for dissent, except now. The battlefield is global, instantaneous, and woven with fiber optic threads. The lesson buried in history is clear. Whoever controls what people wear controls how they think, and that truth hasn't frayed one bit. The crisp white pantsuit Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wore to her swearing-in wasn't just a style choice, it was a direct callback to the suffragettes who fought for women's votes a century earlier. That's the enduring power of fashion politics. A single outfit can tie modern movements to historical struggles without saying a word. Today's leaders still manipulate perception through fabric and hue, just as medieval monarchs did. Only now, the battlefield includes social media hashtags and 24-hour news cycles. When Michelle Obama donned Jason Wu on election night or Melania Trump wore that controversial "I really don't care" jacket, they weren't just dressing. They were broadcasting messages sharper than any press release. Color remains the ultimate political shorthand, though its meanings keep evolving. Ronald Reagan's team famously tested how his navy suits played under studio lights, while Margaret Thatcher's handlers insisted on royal blue to soften her steely image. But the real game changer, Angela Merkel's rotating rainbow of pantsuits, which German psychologists later decoded as a masterclass in controlled relatability, vibrant turquoise for innovation talks, sober burgundy for crisis management. These choices aren't accidents. They're calculated to bypass logical scrutiny and lodge directly in voters' subconscious. Protest movements have weaponized this visual language with even greater precision. The yellow vests of France's uprising took their name and power from the high-visibility garb of working-class laborers. Hong Kong's umbrella protesters coordinated in white to symbolize peaceful resistance, while Belarusian activists adopted red and white, the colors of their banned national flag, as silent defiance. Even the humble pink pussy hat from the women's marches carried centuries of baggage, reclaiming a term of humiliation as a unifying emblem. What medieval sumptuary laws and modern dress codes share is their understanding of clothing as social glue. School uniform debates and workplace hijab bans reveal how attire still defines belonging. When France outlawed the burkini or the U.S. Senate finally permitted sleeveless dresses, these weren't just policy shifts. They were renegotiations of who gets to decide what bodies mean in public space. The threads connecting Elena of Aquitaine's silk diplomacy to Kamala Harris's Converse sneakers are stronger than we realize. Both used personal style to expand what power looks like. The lesson from history's fabric battles: clothing revolutions rarely stay confined to closets. The same corsets that once symbolized female constraint became suffragette armor when tightly laced for marches. Punk's ripped fishnets, born as rebellion against Thatcherism, now influence high-fashion runways. Even Marie Antoinette's much-mocked muslin shifts eventually democratized into the cotton t-shirts that carry today's protest slogans. Every stitch in history's tapestry proves that when people reclaim the right to dress themselves, they're really fighting for the right to define themselves, and that battle never goes out of style. Embroidery needles were the unsung weapons of royal courts, wielded by artisans whose hands could spell triumph or treason with a single stitch. These master embroiderers worked in dimly lit chambers, translating political whispers into floral motifs and biblical scenes, their threads carrying messages too dangerous for parchment. A Tudor courtier's sleeve might bloom with innocent-looking honeysuckle, but to those in the know, the flower's clinging vines whispered of loyalty to Catherine of Aragon. A French noblewoman's headdress could glitter with gem-studded bees, a covert nod to the industrious Bonapartes. The real genius, these designs often passed inspection because only a handful of people, including the wearer and their enemies, understood the code. The process was as meticulous as espionage. Embroidery patterns were first sketched on parchment by scholars fluent in heraldry and classical symbolism, then handed to trusted stitchers who often worked under oath. Mary, Queen of Scots, famously employed a blind embroiderer in her captivity. Knowing his disability made him immune to bribery or threats. The most treasonous symbols were hidden in plain sight. A compass disguised as a flower stem pointed to safe houses for Catholic priests in Protestant England, while the knotted threads of Elizabethan blackwork spelled out psalm verses banned by the crown. Even the direction of stitches held meaning. Silver thread couched left to right might signal ascent to a plot, while right to left could mean retreat. Some artisans paid dearly for their craft. After the Babington plot to assassinate Elizabeth I was uncovered, investigators traced conspirators through their embroidered waistcoats, the innocent-looking acorns actually mapping out meeting points. The embroiderer who created them was hanged with needles still tucked in her apron. Yet others became unlikely power brokers. In Versailles, Madame de Pompadour's personal embroiderer rose to nobility after encoding secret treaty terms into the Marquise's fan designs, each delicate scene hinting at territorial concessions. The materials themselves were political statements. Protestant nobles favored English wool threads over popish Italian silks, while exiled Stuarts in France wore tartan ribbons woven with hair from fallen supporters, part memorial, part provocation. Catherine the Great took it further, having her coronation robe embroidered with gold looted from Ottoman mosques, turning every stitch into a miniature victory monument. But the ultimate power of these hidden messages lay in their deniability. When Anne Boleyn was accused of flaunting her ambition through pomegranate motifs, the symbol of Catherine of Aragon's lineage, she simply smiled and called them just pretty fruits. Without a confession or a careless artisan's testimony, symbolism remained slippery enough to evade punishment yet potent enough to rally allies. This delicate dance of concealment and revelation transformed embroidery hoops into the era's most elegant weapons, where the right pattern in the wrong hands could unravel dynasties. The royal tailor's measuring tape held more secrets than the king's own diary. These artisans didn't just stitch seams, they stitched together the fragile fabric of power itself. Take Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Louis XIV's Minister of Finance, who began his rise as a lowly tailor's apprentice. His intimate knowledge of noblemen's waistlines, expanding from years of lavish banquets, allowed him to blackmail half the court into paying overdue taxes. But the real power players were the anonymous master tailors who worked in shadowed alcoves, their scissors snipping in rhythm with court intrigues. One particularly cunning trick involved the message doublet, a garment with layers that could be peeled apart like an onion. During the Italian Wars, tailors for the Medici family stitched encoded battle plans between linen and wool, knowing enemy hands would never suspect a nobleman's undershirt. Even more ingenious, the pregnancy panel, adjustable corsets with hidden lacing that allowed queens like Anne of Austria to conceal heirs until their safe delivery. A single loose thread could mean execution, yet these tailors sewed with the precision of surgeons and the discretion of cryptographers, but their greatest weapon was knowledge. A tailor taking the inseam of Henry VIII's son, Edward VI, noticed the boy's legs swelling, a detail that warned physicians of the kidney disease that would later claim him. Elizabeth I's seamstresses recorded her shrinking waistline years before her death, hinting at the bone loss modern historians now attribute to lead-laced makeup. These observations weren't just gossip, they were intelligence that shaped succession plans and international alliances. The downfall came when fashion itself turned traitor. In 1720 France, tailors conspiring with Spanish agents introduced a new style. Tight sleeves requiring such strenuous movement that noblemen's sword arms fatigued during duels. The resulting deaths were written off as accidents until a drunken tailor boasted in a Paris tavern. Then there was the infamous corset plot against Russia's Empress Anna, where her own dressmakers stiffened her stays with whalebone sharpened to puncture ribs, a scheme foiled only when a lady-in-waiting pricked her finger on the rigging. Perhaps the cruelest twist was how easily these masters of deception became victims of their own craft. When Charles II of England needed scapegoats for his failing war coffers, he had his royal tailors arrested for extravagant stitching, a nonsense charge that conveniently confiscated their life savings. Louis XV's favorite tailor met worse, poisoned by a rival's gift of gloves lined with mercury-soaked silk. The lesson was clear. In a world where clothing was camouflage, armor, and sometimes a noose, the hands that held the needles ultimately held the power until the moment they didn't. And as we'll see next, when those threads of control finally snapped, they unraveled entire dynasties in their fall. Marie Antoinette's wardrobe accounts read like a revolution's fuel ledger. The infamous Rose Burton bills reveal she commissioned 300 dresses in a single year, enough to feed Versailles' starving beggars for decades. But her fatal miscalculation wasn't the spending itself, it was the timing. As bread riots erupted across Paris, the Queen's courtiers played a cruel game, dressing peasant children in her discarded silks and parading them through the palace as living dolls. This grotesque theater, meant to amuse bored aristocrats, became the spark that turned fashion into a death warrant. When revolutionary crowds later stormed the Tuileries, they didn't just seize the royal family, they pillaged her wardrobe first, waving chemises embroidered with fleurs-de-lis like battle flags. The Romanovs repeated history's warning with even bloodier consequences. Tsarina Alexandra's obsession with lavish court balls continued as Russian soldiers froze in threadbare uniforms during World War I. Her most infamous misstep, commissioning a single ball gown from the House of Worth that cost more than an entire field hospital. But the true symbol of their disconnect came in the family's final months. Imprisoned Bolshevik guards noted how the Grand Duchesses stubbornly changed into evening gowns each night, as if silk could still shield them from the coming bullets. Their impractical lace collars and jeweled buttons, so at odds with the coarse fabric of their captors' uniforms, visually cemented why the revolution had to happen. Yet for every monarch who fell victim to their own wardrobe, others wielded fashion as a lifeline. When plague ravaged 17th century London, Charles II's doctors made an odd discovery. Those wearing wool survived at higher rates than silk-clad nobles. The coarse fabric's tight, weave-blocked fleas carrying the Black Death, sparking a nationwide shift from luxurious velvets to practical worsted wool. Similarly, Napoleon's troops in Egypt avoided blinding sandstorms by adopting local head wraps, the first recorded use of what we now call sunscreen clothing. Even corsets, often vilified as instruments of oppression, saved lives when Victorian women sewn into steel-reinforced stays walked away from carriage crashes with intact spines. The most ingenious survival fashion came from Japan's Edo period. Court ladies wore 12-layered kimono not just for beauty, but as covert armor, each silk fold capable of slowing a dagger's thrust. Their hairpins doubled as poison-testing rods, while elaborate sleeve ties could be unraveled into emergency ropes during fires. This wasn't vanity, it was vital engineering, proving that in the right hands, even the most decorative trends could become tools of resilience. Fashion's paradox lies in this duality. The same silks that toppled thrones also built sanctuaries. A queen's overdress might ignite rebellion, while a merchant's woolen cloak could quietly outlast plagues and wars. The lesson stitched into history's seams is clear: clothes don't just reflect power. They test it, sometimes to destruction, sometimes to salvation. And in that tension between opulence and survival, the truest designs reveal themselves. Elizabeth I's pearl-encrusted bodices concealed more than royal jewels. They hid a lattice of whalebone and steel, turning her iconic silhouette into a walking fortress. Court records reveal her dressmakers hammered thin metal plates between layers of satin, creating garments that could turn aside assassination attempts during public processions. But the real stroke of genius was in the deception. By exaggerating the width of her farthingales and the stiffness of her ruffs, Elizabeth transformed her body into an architectural marvel, impossible to approach closely enough for a knife thrust, yet radiating feminine power. This was armor disguised as vanity, proving that in Tudor England, survival required both a needle and a strategist's mind. Across the steppes, Mongol diplomats elevated this art to psychological warfare. Their deal robes, with their seemingly bulky folds, often concealed lightweight chainmail woven from silk and iron, a combination that could stop arrows while appearing disarmingly graceful. When meeting hostile rulers, they'd deliberately shrug off outer layers to reveal this hidden protection mid-negotiation, a silent demonstration that they came prepared for both talk and treachery. Even their elaborate headdresses served dual purposes. The towering bogtacks worn by noblewomen could shelter throwing daggers in their felted depths, while men's fur-lined hats absorbed sword blows like natural helmets. Gender dictated these survival strategies with brutal precision. Male rulers often relied on overt displays. Henry VIII's reinforced leather doublets broadcasted his martial prowess. But women in power had to weaponize femininity itself. Catherine de Medici's infamous flying squadron of beauties wore corsets laced with aromatic herbs believed to neutralize poison, while their voluminous skirts could conceal anything from documents to derringers. The lead-based sarus that gave Elizabeth her ghostly pallor, though toxic, projected an eerie, almost supernatural untouchability, as if her flesh itself were armored. This gendered armor reached its peak with the stomacher dagger, a slender blade hidden in the decorative chest panel of noblewomen's gowns. Training manuals from Spain to Persia detailed how to pivot the body to draw the weapon during an embrace, turning a curtsy into a killing stroke. Yet perhaps the most subversive tactic came from Japan's honor bugeisha, female warriors who wove razor-sharp chains into their obi sashes. Their flowing sleeves weren't just elegant, they were misdirection, distracting opponents until the silk unfurled into a garrote. Makeup completed the illusion. The same vermilion that tinted Elizabeth's lips contained traces of belladonna, making her kisses literally paralyzing. Venetian courtesans applied mercury-laced creams that glowed under candlelight, a dazzling effect that also sterilized any amorous advances. Even beauty patches, those playful black velvet dots, often covered dueling scars or smallpox marks, transforming flaws into fashionable statements. The cruel irony, these life-saving innovations later became tools of oppression. The very corsets that once shielded queens were tightened to restrict 19th-century women's movement, while armored farthingales shrank into crippling hoopskirts. What began as survival tech for powerful women morphed into societal shackles, proof that fashion's protective potential cuts both ways. As we'll see next, this tension between armor and adornment didn't just shape individual survival, it redefined entire eras of gender politics. High heels weren't always a woman's accessory, they were a king's secret weapon. Louis XIV of France, standing just 5 feet 4 inches, commissioned heels so towering they required silk ribbons to keep them from slipping off. But this wasn't just about vanity. Every inch added to his height translated into psychological dominance, forcing courtiers to crane their necks upward in submission. Meanwhile, Catherine the Great of Russia took the opposite approach, her wide-skirted gowns swallowing entire doorways, forcing diplomats to navigate around her like a human fortress. These weren't just style choices, they were spatial tactics, reshaping the geometry of power itself. Gender roles in royal courts became a high-stakes costume drama, where fabric could either reinforce tradition or shred it to ribbons. In 16th-century Spain, Philip II's stiff, high-necked doublets projected austere masculinity, while his daughter Isabella's farthingales, hooped skirts spanning 6 feet, turned her into a living throne no subject could ignore. Yet cross the Alps into Renaissance Italy, and you'd find men like the Duke of Urbino dripping in lace so delicate it fluttered when he dueled, proving refinement could coexist with fierceness. The rules shifted like hemlines. What passed for virile in one court spelled weakness in another. But for every ruler who weaponized gender norms, there were those who outright defied them. Queen Christina of Sweden shocked Europe by wearing men's boots and cropping her hair. Her leather-clad stride a deliberate rejection of the corseted constraints expected of monarchs. When advisors protested, she reportedly threw a goblet at them and declared, "My clothes are my business." Even more brazen was the Chevalier d'Eon, the French spy who spent decades oscillating between military uniforms and ball gowns, their true biological sex becoming a diplomatic weapon. Enemies never knew which version might show up to negotiations. The backlash against these rebels was as creative as their defiance. When James I of England's favorite courtier, the Earl of Somerset, dared to wear peach-colored satin to Parliament, rivals had the fabric analyzed for effeminate dyes. In Persia, Shah Abbas executed a governor for wearing Ottoman-style trousers, seeing the cut as treasonous gender betrayal. Yet the most revealing punishments were reserved for women who appropriated male power dressing. When the Duchess of Newcastle published philosophical works in the 1600s, critics didn't just attack her ideas, they lampooned her habit of wearing tailored waistcoats as proof she'd stolen men's thoughts with their clothes. What these battles reveal is fashion's role as society's silent enforcer. A king's heel or a queen's skirt wasn't just about personal expression, it was a visual contract with the world, dictating who got to loom large and who must shrink away. But as we'll see next, when those contracts were torn up, the fallout reshaped history far beyond the dressing room. Queen Christina of Sweden didn't just cross-dress, she weaponized it. At her abdication ceremony in 1654, she shocked Europe by striding into the throne room in a man's riding coat and breeches, her cropped hair gleaming under the candlelight. This wasn't just personal preference, it was political theater. By rejecting the enormous farthingales and pearl-encrusted bodices expected of female monarchs, she forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Power had no gender, only costumes. Her choice sent seismic ripples through royal courts, where ambassadors scrambled to rewrite protocols for a ruler who refused to play by the sartorial rules. But Christina was far from alone in this sartorial rebellion. Over in France, the Chevalier Dion turned gender fluidity into espionage gold. Assigned male at birth but living openly as a woman for decades, Dion leveraged their ambiguous appearance to infiltrate both sides of the English Channel. Disguised in lavish gowns, they smuggled secrets for Louis XV, while their sudden shifts back to military uniform kept enemies perpetually off balance. The brilliance of their deception, it exposed how deeply clothing shaped perception. When Dion finally settled into life as a woman, even the London Stock Exchange took bets on their true sex, proof that fabric could blur reality itself. Yet for every ruler who shattered expectations, there were those who wielded conformity like a scalpel. Take Frederick the Great of Prussia, whose deliberately plain military coats became his trademark. While other monarchs dripped in embroidery, Frederick's stark uniforms broadcasted Spartan discipline, inspiring his troops to follow him into battle without question. His sister Wilhelmine took the opposite approach, using ultra-feminine pastel silks to mask her political brilliance, playing the frivolous princess while secretly negotiating treaties behind folded fans. The real power of these choices lay in their unpredictability. When Russian Empress Elizabeth hosted her infamous metamorphosis balls, requiring male guests to wear gowns and women to don uniforms, she didn't just amuse her court, she exposed their deepest insecurities. Nobles accustomed to reading power in lace and velvet suddenly floundered, their social radar jammed by inverted symbolism. Similarly, when Ottoman Sultan Mehmed IV executed a governor for wearing the wrong style of turban, it wasn't about the fabric, it was about who got to define identity itself. This tension between rebellion and conformity reveals fashion's ultimate paradox. The more rigid the rules, the more explosive their breaking becomes. A queen's breeches or a spy's petticoats weren't just personal statements, they were grenades rolled into the gilded halls of tradition. And as we'll see next, sometimes the most revolutionary act wasn't defiance, but knowing exactly when to blend in. The Spanish court under Philip II didn't just prefer black, they enforced it with the zeal of a holy edict. Every noble, every diplomat, even visiting princes were draped in identical inkai tones, their individuality smothered under layers of wool and conformity. This wasn't mourning attire, it was psychological warfare. By eliminating color, Philip erased distractions, turning his court into a monochrome chessboard where every move centered on him. The message was clear: dissent couldn't thrive where even fabric was homogenized. Prussia took this control to chilling extremes. Frederick William I, known as the Soldier King, didn't stop at standardizing military uniforms. He dictated civilian wardrobes down to the last button. Tailors faced fines for deviating from state-approved patterns, while women's skirts were measured in public squares to ensure they didn't exceed regulation length. The goal: a society where every stitch reinforced discipline, where a merchant's coat and a general's epaulettes came from the same authoritarian loom. Yet beneath this enforced sameness, rebellion simmered in the seams. Wealthy Spaniards secretly lined their summer robes with vibrantly colored silks, flipping their collars during private gatherings to flash hidden dissent. Prussian aristocrats, forced to wear state-mandated blue, commissioned illegally dyed versions with undertones of violet, a subtle middle finger to the crown. Even the Habsburgs' infamous black became a canvas for covert competition, as nobles vied to source the rarest, luster-black dyes that shimmered like oil under candlelight, turning uniformity into a shadowy hierarchy. Religion poured sacral weight into these sartorial straitjackets. Philip's black wasn't just political, it was penitential, a visual sermon on Spanish Catholicism's severity. Puritan England mirrored this, with sumptuary laws masquerading as moral codes. Lace was deemed vanitous, satin sinful, but the divine dress code cut both ways. When Pope Clement VII needed to humble Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, he did it through fabric, forcing him to wear a plain white penitent's robe and kneel barefoot for hours outside Bologna's cathedral. The emperor's humiliation wasn't recorded in treaties, but in the collective memory of those who saw his ermine traded for sackcloth. The irony: these attempts to control through clothing often birthed unintended devotion. Dutch Calvinists turned their mandated drab attire into a badge of pride, their unadorned collars signaling divine election. Quaker greys became so iconic that followers could recognize each other across continents, their austerity forging bonds stronger than royal decrees. Even the Prussian military's rigidity backfired. Their standardized uniforms became so admired that soon civilians mimicked them voluntarily, blurring the line between enforcement and aspiration. What began as control ended as culture, proving that no ruler, no matter how absolute, could fully dictate what fabric meant to those who wore it. The next time you zip up a uniform or slip on a little black dress, remember, you're threading your way through a battlefield where identity and authority have clashed for centuries. And sometimes the quietest garments carry the loudest rebellions. White wasn't just a color for medieval popes, it was a divine spotlight. When Innocent III draped himself in immaculate linen, he wasn't making a fashion statement. He was embodying the radiance of heaven itself. This celestial branding extended to every stitch. His gloves symbolized purity of touch, his red shoes the blood of martyrs. Even the width of his sash marked his role as Christ's vicar on earth. But the real power lay in contrast. Against the grime and soot of medieval streets, that blinding whiteness screamed otherworldliness, convincing peasants their pope wasn't just holy, he was untouchable. Over in Constantinople, Byzantine emperors took this visual theology even further. Their robes weren't sewn, they were consecrated. Gold thread woven with strands of silk purportedly touched by saints, purple dyes blessed by patriarchs, jewels arranged in patterns mirroring constellations described in scripture. To wear the imperial laurels wasn't just to dress, it was to become a walking cathedral. your very folds radiating divine authority. A visiting ambassador once described the effect. When the emperor moved, the light followed him like God's own shadow. Yet nowhere was the sacred secular collision more explosive than in Japan. The emperor's Sokutai robes were believed to channel the sun goddess Amaterasu's power, so potent that commoners were forbidden from even glimpsing them. When warlords like Toyotomi Hideyoshi began commissioning similar designs, it sparked the garment wars of the 16th century. Battles fought not over land, but over who had the right to wear certain sleeve patterns. Monks burned temples in protest, claiming imitation robes blurred the line between heaven and ambition. The Protestant Reformation turned this celestial wardrobe warfare global. Martin Luther's decision to preach in a plain black professor's robe instead of priestly vestments wasn't just practical, it was theological vandalism. Overnight, Catholic vestments became symbols of corruption to reformers, while Calvinists in Geneva passed laws requiring all citizens to wear unadorned wool, calling silk the devil's spiderweb. The backlash was brutal. In Spain, the Inquisition arrested merchants for selling grey cloth, a color now associated with Lutheran modesty, while Anglican bishops ordered the destruction of medieval copes, their embroidered saints scraped off with knives. Perhaps the most unexpected battlefield was headwear. When Russian Tsar Peter the Great forced boyars to shave their beards and wear European wigs, old believers hid their facial hair in special pouches, believing its removal doomed their souls. Meanwhile, in Ottoman lands, the Sultan's turban folds were so politically charged that rival factions would count threads to verify authenticity, sparking riots when counterfeit styles appeared. These weren't just arguments over fabric, they were existential battles over who got to dress the divine. And as we'll see next, when kings started mimicking priestly robes and popes donned military garb, the celestial dress code became a theological minefield. The Protestant Reformation didn't just tear apart churches, it shredded wardrobes. When Martin Luther nailed his theses to Wittenberg's door, he might as well have set fire to every embroidered chasuble in Europe. Overnight, the elaborate vestments that once signaled holiness became symbols of corruption in reformers' eyes. Calvinists in Geneva took scissors to clerical robes, leaving ministers preaching in stark black gowns that looked more like academic uniforms than sacred garments. But the backlash turned violent when Catholic loyalists in Antwerp started slitting the throats of merchants caught selling plain wool, the new heretic cloth. What began as theological debate spilled into the streets, where riots erupted over ruffled collars and lace-trimmed sleeves, each stitch now a declaration of allegiance. Across continents in Mughal India, turbans told a similarly explosive story. Emperor Akbar tried uniting Hindu and Muslim nobles by creating a hybrid headwrap, only for traditionalists on both sides to reject it as blasphemy. A Hindu courtier wearing the wrong fold risked being branded a traitor to his caste, while a Muslim noble spotted without the mandated vertical pleat faced accusations of apostasy. The tension peaked when artisans began weaving hidden messages into the fabric, Quranic verses for Muslim nobility, Sanskrit prayers for Hindu allies, all invisible unless held to light. These weren't just hats, they were ticking time bombs of identity politics. Yet for all its divisive power, fashion also wove together the most unexpected alliances. Take the love sleeve phenomenon of Renaissance Europe, where betrothed nobles exchanged detachable sleeves as tokens of affection. A knight might wear his lady's embroidered silk sleeve into battle, its fluttering ribbons doubling as both romantic banner and protective talisman. In Japan, the intricate knotting of a woman's obi sash communicated her availability. Certain twists signaled she was seeking marriage, while others warned suitors away. Even the strictest societies found loopholes for courtship. Puritan couples in New England circumvented bans on flashy attire by stitching secret floral patterns inside cloak linings, their forbidden blooms pressed heart to heart during Sunday sermons. The most ingenious marriage diplomacy happened in fabric itself. When the Medici needed to cement an alliance with France, they didn't just send Catherine de Medici. They packed her trousseau with Florentine silks woven with fleurs de lis so fine, French tailors couldn't replicate them. For generations, every time a French noble admired her gowns, they unconsciously reinforced Florence's cultural dominance. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, brides from rival empires were given ceremonial robes reversible between Christian and Islamic motifs. Their very seams a prayer for unity. This duality fashion as both weapon and wedding ring reveals its true power. The same sleeve that sparked riots in one context might seal a peace treaty in another. A turban could divide nations or crown a union, depending on whose hands tied the knot. And as we'll see next, when love and politics intertwined, the results could reshape history itself, one stitch at a time. The wedding dress of Maria Theresa of Spain wasn't just a garment, it was a gilded balance sheet. When she crossed the Pyrenees in 1660 to marry Louis XIV, her silver-threaded gown literally shimmered with the weight of her dowry. Each embroidered fleur-de-lis contained exactly 12 strands of bullion, a calculable display of Habsburg wealth meant to silence French nobles questioning the alliance. But the real power play was hidden in her train's lining, miniature maps of Spanish territories stitched in silk, a visual reminder of the lands now tethered to France. This wasn't romance, it was realpolitik draped in satin. Catherine the Great took a bolder approach for her nuptials. Arriving in Russia as a minor German princess, she understood her survival depended on rewriting expectations. So she shocked the court by marrying Peter III not in traditional brocade, but in a militaristic uniform of Prussian blue complete with a sword belt. The message cut deeper than any blade. She wasn't just a bride, but a co-ruler in waiting. Years later, when she overthrew her husband in a coup, witnesses noted she wore that same uniform, its buttons now polished to blinding brightness. Even the smallest accessories carried coded significance. Tudor queens exchanged true love handkerchiefs embroidered with strawberries, their seeds symbolizing fertility, but also the inevitable scattering of dynastic influence. A French noblewoman's glove gifted to an English suitor might be lined with verses from Ovid, the leather itself treated with rose oil so the scent lingered like a promise. But perhaps the most ingenious romantic weapon was the gimel ring, a twisted band separating into two interlocking pieces. When Elizabeth I sent one to the Duke of Anjou, the hidden compartment inside her half contained a portrait miniature, not of herself but of England's warships. Not all sartorial unions ended in harmony. When Anne of Austria's trousseau arrived in France, the Medici Queen Dowager had the Spanish-made gowns publicly burned, replacing them with French silks to humiliate her new daughter-in-law. The infamous necklace scandal that doomed Marie Antoinette began with jewelers weaving political sabotage into its design, each diamond placed to exaggerate her perceived extravagance. And when Henry VIII gifted Anne Boleyn a nightgown embroidered with falcons, his personal emblem, it wasn't romance but a warning. She soared only by his permission. The cruelest twist, these fabrics often outlasted the marriages they celebrated. Catherine of Aragon's wedding veil, woven with pomegranates symbolizing fertility, became her shroud 30 years later when she died abandoned. Mary, Queen of Scots, wore the same white satin gown to both her weddings and her execution. Its once virginal hue yellowed with age and betrayal. In the end, the stitches that bound empires together could unravel just as quickly, leaving behind only fragile threads and fractured promises. Anne Boleyn's French hood did more than shield her from the English chill. It framed a revolution. That sleek black crescent, imported from France, became a lightning rod for scandal, branded by enemies as the whore's cap. But the real provocation wasn't its shape, it was what it represented. While English noblewomen swaddled themselves in gable hoods symbolizing modesty, Anne's bare hairline and exposed neckline whispered of Reformation ideals: simplicity, accessibility, defiance. Her hood wasn't just headwear, it was heresy stitched in velvet, a walking challenge to both the Catholic Church and the patriarchal order. Madame de Pompadour took this dangerous glamour to Versailles' razor's edge. Her infamous robe volante, with its scandalously sheer sleeves and plunging neckline, wasn't merely indecent, it was ingenious political theater. By flouting court modesty codes while still dripping in royal jewels, she visually embodied Louis XV's absolutism, so powerful, even his mistresses could break rules others died upholding. Critics called it vulgar. Historians now recognize it as calculation. Her exposed skin mirrored France's own contradictions, a society straining under the weight of its own excesses. But the true power of these scandalous stitches lay in their ripple effects. When Marie Antoinette appeared in her minimalist muslin, Gaul, decades later, she wasn't just rejecting stiff brocades, she was accidentally fueling revolutionary fervor. The same gowns that made her seem relatable to Enlightenment thinkers also exposed the monarchy's detachment. French silk workers, already starving from industrial collapse, saw their queen wearing cheap imported cotton and revolted. That peasant dress became proof of her indifference, woven into the indictment that sent her to the guillotine. The pattern repeated globally. In Edo-era Japan, geishas caught wearing forbidden red silk, a color reserved for shoguns' wives, faced execution. Their vibrant kimonos burned as warnings. Yet underground, merchants stitched coded rebellion into linings, carp patterns symbolizing perseverance for oppressed Christians, or hidden map prints guiding fugitives to safe houses. Even Puritan New England had its fabric rebels, women who smuggled lace-trimmed petticoats beneath drab wool, their hems weighted with contraband ribbons that swayed with every step, a quiet riot of color in a grayscale world. What transformed these personal choices into political earthquakes was their visibility. A queen's hemline wasn't private, it was propaganda, broadcast in portraits, described in pamphlets, copied by ambitious commoners. When Catherine the Great wore her military uniform to review troops, she didn't just dress for efficiency, she crafted an image of imperial might that rattled every European court. Conversely, when Sweden's Queen Christina abdicated in men's breeches, her wardrobe became the manifesto her coronation oath never was, a rejection of gendered power structures centuries before the term existed. The thread connecting these moments, fashion's unique ability to make dissent undeniable. Laws could ban rebellious speech, but a noblewoman's embroidered floral border, tracing the exact pattern used by peasant rebels, spoke volumes without uttering a word. Kings could burn seditious pamphlets, but they couldn't strip every subject of subversive sleeve cuts or smuggled dyes. And when revolutions finally erupted, it was often fabric that led the charge. The Phrygian caps of Parisian radicals, the black armbands of abolitionists, the suffragettes' white dresses symbolizing purity of purpose. Clothing's real scandal wasn't exposing skin, it was exposing hypocrisy. Every time a monarch decried extravagance while draped in gold thread, or a bishop condemned vanity while wearing jeweled mitres, their contradictions hung visible for all to see. And in those gaps between preached morality and practiced excess, revolutions found their footholds, one unraveling stitch at a time. Threads of revolution, fashion's role in overthrowing thrones. The sans-culottes of France rejected knee breeches as symbols of aristocracy. Russian revolutionaries burned corsets as acts of liberation. Fashion didn't just mirror change, it accelerated it. But what replaced these old systems? Next, we'll see how new rulers rewrote the rules. When the French Revolution's dust settled, the new regime didn't just abolish the monarchy, they reinvented the wardrobe. The iconic tricolor cockade pinned to every citizen's lapel wasn't just patriotic flair, it was a sartorial loyalty oath. Revolutionary leaders like Robespierre swapped silk breeches for practical trousers, but the real masterstroke was the carmagnole, a short jacket worn by working-class militants. Overnight, this humble garment became the uniform of liberty, its very seams stitched with defiance. Yet the irony was palpable. As radicals preached equality, they enforced dress codes as rigid as the aristocracies. Women wearing crosses or aristocrats caught hiding knee breeches faced the guillotine, proving fashion's power to both overthrow tyrants and create new ones. Across Europe, the fallout was just as dramatic. In Russia, Bolshevik commissars didn't just discard imperial uniforms, they turned fabric into ideology. Lenin's signature cap, copied from Finnish workers, became the face of proletarian simplicity, while Alexandra Kollontais' rejection of corsets symbolized women's liberation. But the revolution's most cunning move was standardizing the rubashka, a loose peasant blouse. By dressing everyone from factory workers to party officials in identical rough linen, they visually erased class distinctions, at least in theory. In reality, the elite's rubashki was secretly tailored from finer cloth, a quiet betrayal of the very equality they preached. Yet nowhere was fashion's political whiplash more jarring than in post-colonial Haiti. After overthrowing French rule, Emperor Jacques I commissioned robes blending African Kent cloth with European court styles, a visual declaration that black sovereignty could redefine luxury. His crown, woven from gold looted from plantation owners, turned a symbol of oppression into one of triumph. Meanwhile, in the young United States, Benjamin Franklin shocked European diplomats by appearing at Versailles in plain homespun, a calculated rejection of British textiles that fueled America's own manufacturing revolt. These new rulers grasped a timeless truth: revolutions aren't complete until they dress the part. But as we'll see next, the most enduring legacy of these sartorial upheavals wasn't the clothes themselves, it was the dangerous idea they planted. That identity isn't inherited but chosen, one stitch at a time. Napoleon's coronation robe didn't just drape his shoulders, it rewrote history. Swathing himself in imperial purple and Roman-style laurels, he didn't merely mimic antiquity, he resurrected it, stitching his new empire onto the faded grandeur of Caesar's. The message was unmistakable. Revolution was over, order restored, but the genius lay in the details. His embroidered bees, borrowed from Merovingian tombs, tied his rule to France's deepest roots, while the ermine lining whispered of Bourbon legitimacy. This wasn't just a costume, it was alchemy, transforming a Corsican soldier into a monarch with needle and thread. Victoria's reign took the opposite approach. Where Napoleon dazzled, she demurred, swapping Georgian decadence for high-necked propriety. Her mourning blacks and widow's caps became the uniform of a nation eager to distance itself from its rakish past. Yet even in restraint, the power play was undeniable. By dressing her vast family in tartans and regional motifs during public appearances, she wove the fractured United Kingdom into a single, stitched-together identity. The crinolines that ballooned around her subjects weren't just modesty shields, they were cages of respectability, reshaping social mores one whalebone hoop at a time. The Bolsheviks staged their own sartorial revolution with brutal efficiency. Out went the Tsar's gold braid, in came the leather jacket, a garment so associated with revolutionary zeal that even Stalin, who later ruled like an emperor, never dared abandon it. Their genius was inversion. Where royals used clothing to elevate, communists used it to equalize. The problem, human nature. Soon, party elites were having their identical grey suits tailored from English wool, proving that even uniformity has its hierarchies. What makes these reinventions so fascinating isn't just their audacity, it's their fragility. Every regime believes its fashion rules will last forever, yet time unravels them all. Napoleon's togas gave way to bourgeois frock coats, Victoria's crinolines collapsed into Edwardian decadence, and Soviet austerity melted into black market jeans. The cycle reveals an uncomfortable truth. No matter how tightly you lace the corset of control, someone will always loosen the strings. Today's leaders still play this game, just with different threads. Modern politicians echo Victoria's modesty with carefully calibrated, relatable outfits, while autocrats ape Napoleon's imperial nostalgia with militarized uniforms. The difference: social media amplifies every sartorial choice into a global manifesto. A president's rolled-up sleeves or a dissident's white shirt now spark instant symbolism wars, proving that while fabrics change, the fight over what they represent never does. The takeaway: next time you get dressed, remember, you're not just choosing clothes, you're casting a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. Melania Trump's "I really don't care" jacket wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was a masterclass in royal-level messaging. Worn during a visit to migrant children separated at the U.S. border, its careless scrawl echoed the calculated ambiguity of medieval queens who used embroidery to say what they couldn't speak aloud. Like Anne Boleyn's falcon-adorned sleeves or Marie Antoinette's peasant muslins, it weaponized simplicity, letting fabric bear the burden of controversy while the wearer remained technically silent. The jacket's genius lay in its deniability. Was it a gaffe or a grenade? Centuries from now, historians may still debate it, just as we puzzle over Elizabeth I's pearl-clutching portraits. Meghan Markle's wardrobe played a subtler but equally strategic game. Her sleek, minimalist sheaths and open collar blouses didn't just reject royal frills, they visually severed ties with the monarchy's stuffy protocols. When she wore a cream Carolina Herrera dress to deliver a speech on gender equality, the lack of restrictive tailoring screamed louder than any slogan. Here was a woman who could breathe, think, and rule on her own terms. Compare that to Kate Middleton's dutiful replications of Diana's style, one a quiet rebellion, the other a velvet-gloved concession. Both approaches follow the ancient playbook of royal women who understood: your silhouette is your manifesto. Corporate boardrooms have become the new royal courts, enforcing unspoken sumptuary laws with brutal efficiency. Tech giants preach casual Fridays, while promoting employees who wear Patagonia vests like Silicon Valley ermine. Law firms still judge associates by the thread count of their suits, just as Tudor courtiers measured worth by the width of a ruff. Even Starbucks' apron standardization echoes the Habsburgs' black enforced conformity, both systems banking on uniformity to reinforce hierarchy. The modern twist: today's rebels weaponize compliance. Junior bankers subvert dress codes by pairing regulation suits with rainbow socks, mirroring Renaissance merchants who lined legal gray cloaks with forbidden crimson silk. Social media turned every influencer into a would-be monarch. Their sponsored posts, the modern equivalent of royal portraits distributed to sway public opinion. A Kardashian's shapewear line owes more to Catherine de Medici's corset propaganda than to marketing textbooks. TikTok's quiet luxury trend, direct descendant of Versailles' understated luster blacks, where true status whispered rather than screamed. The difference is scale. Where Louis XIV needed months to spread a trend through Europe, a celebrity can spark a global frenzy before breakfast. The ultimate lesson lies in fashion's double-edged thread. For every ruler who used clothing to control, there were subjects who repurposed it to resist. Sumptuary laws birthed black markets, royal monopolies sparked smuggling empires, and today's workplace dress codes fuel entire industries selling professional enough looks to marginalized groups. The power never really belonged to the silk or the dress code, it belonged to whoever decided what those symbols meant. When a Nigerian lawyer wears traditional agbob to a London court or a plus-size activist pairs a ball gown with a protest sign, they're doing what merchants did when they sewed gold into hems and nobles did when they dyed wool with lichen, reclaiming the narrative one stitch at a time. Perhaps that's why these battles feel so familiar. The weapons have evolved from poisoned gloves to viral hashtags, but the war remains unchanged. Whether in a palace or a parliament, a boardroom or a Twitter thread, clothing remains the original social media, a platform we can't opt out of, broadcasting our allegiances and rebellions before we speak a word. The next time you stand before a closet, ask yourself, in the ancient, silent language of fabric, what will you declare today? From poisoned hemlines to power suits, history proves that fabric is the ultimate shapeshifter. One moment a crown's ornament, the next a guillotine's blade. Consider this, when a 21st century diplomat wears a locally crafted brooch during tense trade talks, or a CEO dons sneakers with her tailored blazer, they're replaying Catherine de Medici's silk diplomacy with modern materials. The weapons have changed, no one stitching arsenic into gloves anymore, but the battlefield remains. Social media algorithms now serve as the new royal tailors, dictating trends with the same iron fist as Louis XIV's wardrobe decrees, while influencer collaborations replicate the exclusivity of Renaissance sumptuary laws. What makes these age-old tactics so enduring? They exploit a primal truth. Clothing is our first language. Before we speak, our clothes announce our allegiances, aspirations, and rebellions. A TikTok teen pairing a thrifted military jacket with vegan leather pants channels the same subversion as an 18th century merchant's wife hiding smuggled lace under her apron. Even the minimalist capsule wardrobe movement echoes Puritan rejections of excess, both born from crises where less literally meant more survival. The real power lies in fashion's unique duality. It's both armor and vulnerability, as Queen Elizabeth II demonstrated by wearing bright monochrome ensembles in crowds, a strategic choice to be instantly visible yet untouchable. Modern politicians mimic this with their signature colors, the calculated relatability of a rolled-up sleeve, the authority of a structured shoulder. But the flip side is just as potent. When protesters worldwide adopted the yellow vests of French laborers or the white dresses of suffragettes, they proved that uniformity can be the ultimate disruptor. A lesson medieval peasants learned when they dyed their tunics heretic green to defy church decrees. So where does this leave us today? Staring into our closets every morning, we're all unwitting players in a game whose rules were written centuries ago. That corporate dress code policing skirt lengths, a direct descendant of sumptuary laws, the frenzy over limited edition sneakers, modern-day contraband velvet. Even the backlash against fast fashion mirrors Reformation-era contempt for decadent silks. The cycle is unbroken, only the fabrics have changed. This isn't just history, it's a mirror. Every dress code enforced, every trend appropriated, every uniform mandated repeats the ancient dance of control and defiance. The difference now, awareness is the needle that can unravel the pattern. When you choose a vintage band tee over algorithm-pushed fast fashion, or when a politician opts for a recycled suit instead of luxury wool. Those stitches form a new kind of rebellion, one where the fabric of the future isn't dictated by palaces or algorithms, but by the hands that weave it. The loom is yours. What will you create?